Hello and welcome to Quilt Addicts Anonymous. I'm Stephanie Soebbing. Today we're doing another Quilting the Quilt video where we do a little play-by-play where we get to watch me quilt on the long arm as I kind of give you the play-by-play of what it is I'm doing and why I'm making the decisions that I make so that you guys can give it a try at home. Now we've been doing a couple of really simple ones lately because when I've been working on those quilts I've been under the gun to get them done. But this time we are quilting Starburst. This pattern is in my book, Fat Quarter Workshop. It's a best-selling book on Amazon. You can get a signed copy from us over at shop.quiltaddictsanonymous.com. We redid it in a line that we had called Migration from Free Spirit. It's really pretty. It's got a bunch of really bold colors of animals on migration, and there are lots of really big, bold designs. So this is a perfect pattern to use it with because we have some really big diamonds and then we have some smaller diamonds as well. So as long as you do a good job of pairing fabrics two together that look really good, then you can have lots of really great bigger diamonds all across your quilt that really make this pop and shine. And like this one originally was kind of like a mountainous scene. You can't really see that anymore, but you do see the texture of it and the color, and it really plays well with the one that I use in the background, which is a bunch of neon humpback whales leaping in the air, which you see a little bit bigger in a different block. So I really like it. I like this combination. At the time I'm filming this, we still have kits and fat quarter bundles available, so go grab those over at shop.quiltaddictsanonymous.com. All right, so let's talk about thread. We always start with thread. Most of the time I go with a very neutral thread, and I did use my bone that I almost always use from Glide. It's color number 17443, and that is in the 40 weight with 100% polyester. It has a nice sheen to it, so it kind of like blends into the background really well. And I did use that in the background pieces because I just wanted to create texture. I didn't want to see any thread in that area, but I did go bold for the thread that I used in all the big diamonds. Now I could have matched each one, like I could have found a nice light purple for this one and maybe some blue for this one, but what I did is I went with a nice rich purple, and this one is color Viking and it's color number 42583, and I really like this one because there is purple in almost every fabric in this quilt. There's a couple that are just yellow, but the purple looks good with that, and as long as you're confident in the quilting you're doing on that, it's okay if it stands out in one area. But for the majority of these, we had purple in everything, so it just kind of plays off of that and creates that texture and also adds to the design element, because I always want to add to, not detract from, in my thread color, and I think that the purple was a great suggestion for that for this one. Now I did also use purple in my bobbin. I used white in my bobbin for here. I've got a white background. I'll actually pull it over so you can see it. It's not bound yet, so you know that's coming next, then we're going to take our photos. But you can really very clearly see where I've got the purple here, and the reason for that is I wanted to match it to the top thread rather than worry about what the back of the quilt is going to look like, because if I had the slightest bit of tension issue, there would be white little pokies coming up through all of these where the thread is supposed to meet in the batting, but we all know it doesn't always do that. And so if you have darker fabrics like this one, or like there's a red down here and a black, that white would be really distracting. So that's why I had, it's not the exact same color, but it is a pretty close match. So what I like to do when I'm ordering bobbins is make sure that I've got, you know, all the colors of the rainbow, and then I really kind of go crazy rather than match exactly with the thread. I just make sure that I'm close. So this one, it's a little bit darker in the bobbin, but it's close enough to where it's not going to detract if it comes up through the top. So if you're really into it, you really like using a lot of color threads, you might want to have a light and a dark and maybe a medium tone of each color of the rainbow, and then you can go nuts with your thread and you'll always have something that will work. You're also going to see me use two rulers today. We've got the Natalia Bonner's 4-in-1. This is like my ride or die holy grail ruler. I use it all the time. So far you've just seen me use the straight edge, and we will use that today, but we also are going to use the curvy curved edge to create those nice uniform arcs. And the reason why I love ruler work is because you are able to create uniformity throughout your quilt. So you, not being a machine, are able to create consistent results every time, much more so than if you were to freehand it, and it really creates a very pleasing aesthetic in my thought. So these work really well, I think, in the larger ones. So you can see I've got my ruler here, maybe not because it's clear. And then I used the Archie from Angela Walters for my smaller diamonds because that worked out a little bit better. The curve of this one is just better for being able to go around those little bits. Otherwise, this is just too long of a curve for smaller bits like that. I find that really you need, if you're going to get into ruler work, you need a straight edge and you need a curve, and then a smaller curve is nice to have. And Archie is one of my favorites for the smaller curve. There are other ones too. There's so many rulers out there, but these are the ones that I use most often. I also have the Slim by Angela Walters, and I like that as well. We don't sell any of those, so you can check out those wonderful ladies' websites and get a lot more quilting advice, and you can get their rulers from them. You do not want to just use any old ruler that you have for cutting because that is only 1/8 of an inch thick. Any ruler that you have for long arming is going to be a full 1/4 inch thick in that acrylic, and that is so when you are quilting and you've got your foot going around it, that way it's not going to hop over and crunch your acrylic, and that's scary, and you can pop needles, and it's a powerful machine. You don't want to mess with it. So that's something that you need to have. You also need to have a ruler foot on your machine, whether it's your long arm or your home sewing machine. Basically, it's a piece of metal that is thick and it's a full circle around your needle, and we're going to see that in just a second. If you're working on a long arm, you also need a ruler base. Basically, it slides onto your machine and then it extends that quilting surface, so that way when you're laying your ruler on top of it, it's nice and flat instead of wobbling all over in your skinny long arm throat, because that's no good. You won't be able to get these consistent results. You'll want to contact your machine manufacturer to figure out which one specifically fits your machine, and you probably can order through them. All right, so when you are quilting with ruler work, you have to do multiple passes in many cases in order to have a good path. So you can see I just started at the edge of my quilt, the far left edge, and right now I'm going to go through and I'm going to outline all of my large diamonds. Now this is technically not stitch in the ditch. Stitch in the ditch is when you stitch on the low side of the fabric when you have pressed the seams underneath one fabric. I press my seams open in this quilt, so what I do is I stitch right next to the seam. Now a lot of people who are the quilt police will get their undies in a bunch over this and they will have big problems with it, but I will tell you that there are more than 70 quilts behind me that have all been quilted like this, and I've never ever had a problem. So maybe in the past there were issues with that, but if you're using good quality thread and good quality fabric, you have no problems doing this. So what I'm doing here is I am just lining up my ruler so that it is a 1/4 inch away from where I want to be quilting, and you can see that I'm just on the inside of that. Now I'm traveling from one block to the next, so we're just going to go straight across the entire quilt, and I did 1/2 of the block at a time because that's what fits on my long arm and what I have good control over. So what you kind of have to get used to is making sure that you are holding that ruler a 1/4 inch away of where you want to be stitching. Your needle is going to be exactly a 1/4 inch away from the edge of that ruler foot, that circular metal bit, sometimes it's plastic, and so you want to make sure that you are always that 1/4 inch away from where you're holding your ruler, and then as long as you keep that foot in contact with the ruler at all times, then you're going to be able to quilt whatever shape that ruler is. In this case, we're doing a straight line. All right, so we are going to go ahead and just keep on quilting. And so for this first one, you can see I'm pretty much ignoring all the little diamonds. We're going to get to those in pass number 2. For this one, I'm just quilting down the big diamond, down and hitting all my points and going across, and then just traveling on to the next diamond once I hit that point. Again, I'm just doing 1/2 at a time. In this case, it is the bottom half. I probably should also note that I'm using a stitch regulator, so it doesn't matter how fast or slow I'm going, I'm always going to have even stitches. And also I have it set to where my needle is going to stop in the down position, so that way it can hold my space. And I also turn the needle off as I'm changing my ruler position, that way I don't accidentally get going somewhere. So it's a lot of stop and start and moving things around. All right, so now we're going to start pass number 2. You notice I still started on the side, so that way I don't have any threads to hide. They're all going to be caught in the binding. So now I stopped when I hit my small diamond. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to quilt to the edge. And one thing I didn't do here is I like to do an extra 10 inches of width when I am doing ruler work, because otherwise my ruler base likes to run into my clamps on the side. I didn't do that here, so I had a lot of adjusting. All right, so here I am. I'm going through that small diamond and I'm coming back to the large diamond. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to travel. So I'm able to use my ruler to line it up so that I can quilt exactly on the line that I just did. And then I can keep traveling up until I hit my next small diamond. And then I can do those 2 little diamonds and travel some more. And that's why it's really important to select your thread. I used to be all about cotton thread for everything. But once I started doing more and more quilting, I noticed that the 40 weight polyester was a lot better for what I wanted to do in terms of blending and in being able to travel, because you might be going over these stitches 2-3 times sometimes when you're doing this, and if you are using a very thick thread, that's going to add a lot of bulk and it's not going to look very good. But if you find a nice thin thread, I really love Glide for that, then you are going to be able to go over it multiple times as you're traveling, and you won't be able to tell just looking at it from the quilt. If you get real close and inspect, then yeah, you're going to be able to see that there's a couple of stitching lines there. But you want to really choose that nice thin but good quality thread. All right, so we're just gonna watch this maybe a little bit sped up with some music as I continue going around, quilting around, outlining the outside of those diamonds, and then traveling in the stitching that I already did for those big diamonds. Again, working my way across the quilt, doing 1/2 of the diamond at a time. All right, so now we are starting pass number 3, and this is when we're going to introduce some of the curves. And what I like to do always is outline that block first. It gets everything nice and stable and really outlines it well. But you can see I started just by doing the big curves with my large ruler. Now I'm going to travel and do that modified stitch in the ditch for that open seam, and I'm going to outline the center of that block too, so that way we get that nice texture of the star. And I always stop when I've got to move that ruler. I like fully turn off the machine. All right, so here we are. I'm at the end of my outlining stitch, so I'm going to switch my ruler, and now I've got Archie. And sometimes you kind of have to do a little bit of an adjustment, especially with those curves, to make sure that you are hitting right into that corner, because where you think it's going to be with that 1/4 inch, sometimes it's a little different than where it actually is. I've used Archie a lot, so I'm just kind of used to where everything is, and I can kind of get it in the right spot to start with, but I definitely wasn't able to just lay it down and have it be in the right spot when I first got started. But you'll notice that, again, I'm not laying it right on that point. I'm laying it a 1/4 inch away from the point in all cases, so that way I can quilt right into that corner. And I did all of that all at once, and so now what I'm going to do once I finish this last little bit is I'm going to travel over that stitch line again all the way to the center. And I just keep my rulers just right next to me on top of the quilt as I'm working, so I'm not constantly turning behind me to grab stuff. And I'm just going to stitch right back into that center, and then I'm going to do the arches all the way around the second large diamond. Now this would be the same, just reverse, if you were doing the top half of the block. All right, so we're gonna stop there, and I, again, totally turn off the stitching function whenever I'm stopped at a point, so that way it doesn't run away from me and I can get my ruler positioned. And it's really easy for that first part because you kind of just like snug it up against the ruler, but then you have to eyeball where you wanna be for that ending. And again, sometimes you just have to move it a little. And I generally recommend moving it in small amounts because you don't want to have it be jarring. You want it to be a nice smooth arc. All right, so we're gonna travel again out to the edge, so that way we can quilt the arches with the smaller archie in the smaller diamonds. All right, so here we are again. We're gonna travel back to that center. And essentially for this block, what I always do is I do my large diamonds first, then I, starting in that center, and then I travel out to the edge, do my small diamonds, travel back to that center so I can repeat the process with the next diamond. So here we are on our third diamond. The first one was just the bottom half, and we'll finish off with the bottom half of the other one as well. And it really, you know, once you get the hang of it and moving around, you're good to go. Now that doesn't mean that I knew exactly where I was going on pass one. This is exactly how I quilted the first version of this quilt as well. But I had to remind myself what it was. So I didn't turn the camera on until I was a couple of rows in and I had that path worked out and pretty down in my head. But the idea is that you don't want to have to stop and start constantly as you are quilting. So you want to figure out what your path is going to be so you can quilt fully from one edge of the quilt all the way to the other. So that way you have no threads to bury and you have a better construction overall with that. So in this case, that means I'm taking 3 passes to go through one half of a block, which is all I can fit in my long arm throat anyway, so it's not a big deal. And then we're gonna do the background separate with a different thread. But don't be too afraid of taking the time to do this and do it well, because if we spend so much time quilting the top, sometimes we just want to rush it with the quilting, and really that's the part where you can really elevate it to the next level. And all told, granted, I've been quilting for a long time on a long arm, and I've been quilting for probably about 3-4 years with rulers, so I'm pretty comfortable with them. But it only took me 15 minutes per 3 passes to get across, and so that really is not a lot of time. I was able to get the quilt done in 2 days while having a bunch of other stuff going on. So if this is something that you can dedicate an afternoon to, maybe a couple afternoons over a weekend, you definitely can do this once you get the hang of it. You know, you maybe don't want to try this on an actual quilt top. You maybe want to draw out your block and try it first while you get the hang of it. But you can see now that I finished that first block, and now I'm just going to repeat and do that on the next one. And keeping that path in mind is the most important part. As long as you know where you're going and what you're doing in what order, then it's going to be super easy and you won't have any holes, and you'll be able to get uniform results every single time so that every arch looks the same. All right, so we're just going to fast forward through the rest of this pass, and then we're going to move on to the background with a different thread. Going to jump back in here real quick. So this block, the centers didn't come together perfectly. All of the diamonds didn't meet in the right spot. But what I did was I kind of made it look like they did when I quilted it. So I still quilted and met with a nice diamond in here. I'm actually gonna flip it over so you can see it better. But this is a really busy fabric. So if you can kind of fix that in the quilting, so here you can see it a lot better. Everything is coming to a nice point here, even though it's not on the other side with the fabric. But you can create the illusion that it did, because you're gonna have a little bit of thread buildup, and then your threads are going to create the texture of coming into a point, and then it's less easy to tell that the piecing wasn't quite on is if you've got that busy fabric and you kind of make it, you fudge it a little bit with the way that you quilt it. So even if you didn't have the most perfect center, you can make it appear like it is a lot better than it is if you quilt it in to create that nice star diamond shape, even if it doesn't quite exist on the top. All right, so this is the final pass of the block. So at this point, I have got the white thread in, and I'm coming into about 3/4 of an inch. So what I'm doing is I'm quilting to the point, and then I'm lining up the 3/4 inch mark with the top tip of the triangle, and then I'm lining it back up again with the bottom point, again 1/4 inch away, because we want to, in order to stitch right into the point, our ruler that we're using as our guide needs to stay 1/4 inch away. All right, so, and I'm just gonna keep going in and doing that and working my way around to create that extra little peak. I like to do that where I do something a little bit different in the background than I do in the main area, because then it creates a differentiation. It's got a different texture, and so it helps push it and differentiate that it is different than the star. So if you'll probably be able to see a little better as we're going here. I've got that 3/4 inch line of the ruler lined up with the tip of that point, and then we're just going to keep going down, and I'm just continually flipping that ruler around as I work my way around, again doing 1/2 of the block at a time. In this case, it's the bottom half, and this takes me about 6 minutes a pass, 6-7 minutes a pass, so that way I'm able to do one entire block in about 15 minutes. So this is just one real quick pass going back up. For me, since I did 4 rows in this, it was about an hour left of quilting once I had gotten the entire bit done. So it looks intimidating, it looks hard, but for me, ruler work really helps me look like I'm a lot better quilter than I am, because I'm able to create those really consistent, really professional results every time. And once you get the process down of working with the ruler and keeping it always in contact with the edge of your ruler foot, you too are going to be able to do the same thing. So then it's just a matter of getting a new tool with a new curve to create something new and fun. And it does take more time, but the results are absolutely fabulous, and especially on a quilt like this, where I feel like it really deserves elevated treatment as opposed to an all over thing. I mean, that's so worth it to me. Like I saw in my feed, someone came up where a customer rented 4 hours on a machine on a long arm and got 4 quilt tops done. I'm sorry, that's not great quilting. Yes, it's quilted, it's held together, but it's not something that if you spend hours and hours and hours on the top, you should also expect to spend some time quilting it as well, because you can't just like spend so much time and be so proud of it and then not give 2 thoughts to how you want the quilting to look, because it can make the difference between something that's okay and something that is really elevated by accentuating what you've done with the piecing. And really, I could have done a lot more in this. I could have done some free motion, maybe some ribbon candy or something on the inside of these to really make them pop even more, but this does it. It's still very drapey with this, and it's definitely quilted close enough for the needs of the batting. And I really like the way this turned out. I love using rulers, like I said, so it's definitely something that you want to give a try. Just make sure that you've got the right rulers, that they're meant for a long arm, that you've got your ruler base so that way it's not flopping all over the place, and that you've got a good quality thread that you're going to be able to travel on to do those 3-4 layers sometimes without it getting super bulky and not looking working so hot. So for me, that's the Glide. I go with the 100% polyester in the 40 weight and the one that has the sheen. And I use that in the top and in the bobbin, and it works beautifully for me. My machine really likes it. All right, so now we're at the very bottom of the quilt. What I did was I quilted the entire stars with my purple thread, and then I quilted my final row once I switched threads to my white. So right now I'm doing that modified stitch in the ditch, so that way I can outline the bottom of these half equilateral triangles. So you can see I've hit my seam line here, so now I'm going to change directions. So this is basically the little triangle that turns those hexagonal shaped stars into full rows. So that way we don't have to put things together in a weird way. We can put them together in nice straight lines with no Y seams, which is fabulous. So first I'm just going through, I'm just going to stitch right next to that seam to get everything stitched down and sort of create some definition. So I'm just going to go up and down across the entire bottom row of the quilt, and I do the same thing for the top as well. All right, so now I'm using the 1-inch line on my ruler, and you can put painter's tape or washi tape along it if you have a hard time seeing it. But I'm lining up that 1-inch mark right on that seam line and the stitch that I already did. So that way I can quilt in 1-inch increments across there. So now I've hit my seam, so that's my point where I need to change direction so that I can stay on it. So now I'm still lining up that 1-inch with my previous stitching line, and I'm just going to start now going down once I get everything lined up the way I want. It's a little harder for me to have the ruler on top of the ruler of the presser foot. I prefer to have it on the bottom, but it doesn't quite work when you're stitching the bottom of it. All right, so now I'm just going to travel along the area that's going to get covered up by my binding until I'm about 1 inch away from the second little bit, and then I can just keep on going, following that same process, stitching it inch down from my last stitching line, turning once I hit that center seam, and coming back down the other way to create those nice uniform 1-inch stitches. All right, so here we are doing it again, same process, 1 inch down from where we started. I think we're gonna do it one more time, and then the bottom part is together. There really is no rhyme or reason of where you wanna stop. It's just an aesthetic preference to what you think looks good. But always travel in that area that is going to get covered up by your binding. It makes that seam a little stronger, a little straighter, but it really allows you to get from one place to another without having to stop and start all the time with those threads. All right, here's our last and final row. You can see it's pretty close to the edge. I certainly could do one more, but I just don't think it's worth it in order to make that aesthetic. I think it looks pretty good. So we're just gonna keep following along. It's just a tiny little one at this point because it's just a teeny little bit at the bottom of the triangle that's created by putting those two together. All right, well, I hope you have enjoyed this video. It is really a lot of fun for me to share these with you guys and really kind of take you behind the scenes of my thought process, especially in a quilt like this where there was a lot of thought that went into it, and how I wanted it to look and how I wanted to accentuate the different shapes that were in there and the different rulers that I used to make it happen, and thread choice as well. So it's fun. I hope it gives you permission to not feel like you have to rush through when you get to the quilting stage, that you can take your time with that too and really do your quilt top justice, because you worked hard on it, you spent a lot of money on the fabric. Let's make it absolutely beautiful and not just do some haphazard thing that you can get done super fast. There's a place for that. There's always a place for that. But a lot of times I think people will do that on quilts that deserve a little more, like this one deserved a little more for sure. All right, so you can get all the things on our website. You can get the book, Fat Quarter Workshop, which has this pattern, Starburst, and it also has 11 others. And if you get it from us, you get a signed copy from me. The rulers you can get from the websites of Natalia Bonner and Angela Walters. Glide Thread comes from Filatech, or actually now it is Habit Dash is their new name. And we also have kits while supplies last, and some Fat Quarter bundles while supplies last of migration. I think you're really gonna love it. I think when we put it out there, I think a lot of people thought it was beautiful, but we're a little intimidated by it because, like, what are you gonna do with this? It's so different. So I hope we've given you a good idea, and even if it isn't this pattern, maybe you've got an idea of something that you can look for that'll really show off the fabric by using some of the pieces in a very large scale so we can really see it. Like this one, this is icebergs floating around. You can still see them. You can tell that they're icebergs, but it really is fun. It's a lot going on. It's a busy quilt, but by using that really, it's a true solid. It's a white on white for the background. You get a little bit of texture in there, but it really helps the fabric sort of stand out. So you can get all that from us over at shop.quiltaddictsanonymous.com. Make sure you're liked and subscribed both on the channel so you can get all of the free tutorials we put out. We try to do one a week. Sometimes we get a little busy and it's not quite that, but sometimes we give you more than one a week. This week we're going to give you more than one a week. And then we also subscribe to our email list over at shop.quiltaddictsanonymous.com. You get 10% off your first purchase with us. We'll email you a coupon code that you can use for that. Plus you will never miss a video, and you'll know when we get new things arriving. It's a really fun place to be. All right, well, until next time, happy quilting.